Yeah, sorry about that. Where were
Okay,
we?
I can jump in with what I was saying.
Yeah.
I was talking about how the funding that we received some funding from the Google News Initiative, which is a news project that Google has started to fund projects like what we're doing with Amplify Utah. And receiving that funding, it was the key in allowing me to start the nonprofit. I'd been noodling around on this concept for many, many years. And it was what gave me the funding to be able to actually turn it from a passion project that I could spend my free time as a hobby to actually really putting some real effort into. And now the board at Amplify Utah is looking to, because the funding from Google is a year. So we're now looking at bringing in other funding models and how can we tap into other ways to keep this project going. And I think that's going to be, and I'd love to hear from Erica and Charlotte, who have had a lot more experience with this, because we have all of these great ideas. There are so many journalists and so many newsroom leaders who are trying to launch nonprofits, but the money piece, it's always the money, honey, right? Like, how do we continue, how can we make this viable so all of the good ideas and work become something that can be sustainable in this shifting news world? I certainly haven't figured it out. We were lucky to get, one big bulk of cash, but we need to figure out the rest.
Let's see.
But I do know that Erica and Charlotte have had a lot more experience with that.
Yeah. Erica, do you want to take that one on?
Sure, I can give that a shot. So fundraising, it's the same thing with running a newspaper and going after advertising in a way, in that it requires so much time. And so even though I've worked with nonprofits a very long time, and I started up a little nonprofit, and I thought, oh, we're going to be, small and scrappy, and all of our funding is going to go to journalism. And I still have that in mind. However, you really do need to have an infrastructure in place, and the tools and the mechanisms and the planning, the vision and the communications, and putting it all together and an outreach plan to get it out there. So that requires some infrastructure, and that requires a fair amount of work. So it's very similar. It's like, you're flying the airplane while you're trying to build it, or building it while you're trying to fly it. And then we're all accustomed to that in this business as it is. So that part is familiar. It's just you're kind of shifting how you're doing it. As far as the ethical considerations, addressing that, I think actually is can be, whenever you have money involved, there are always ethical considerations. Lauren already has done a really good job of identifying, the firewalls. Donors don't have control. I think 99.9% of donors already understand that. If they're interested in what you're doing, hopefully you've done a good job of developing your vision, developing your mission, conveying what that is to your individual donors and to your larger foundations, and they're there they want to support you already, and so they're open to what you're doing, and generally they don't try to guide what your program work is. So that's my own experience, although there can be anomalies in that system as well. But through Cornerpost, I was very fortunate in that I had a friend who has a foundation, the Null Newman Foundation in Santa Cruz, California, gave us startup funding. And we've started our outreach to individual donors, and we've started getting a little bit of support. And now I realize we really need to come up with a program plan and a fundraising strategy. And I'm actually just really looking forward to it. It's a matter of carving out the time to do it, because it's really fun. It's really gratifying.
Yeah. Let's see, Trip, if you remember what the question was, do you want to go next?
This about the challenges of fundraising
yeah.
and attentions.
Yeah.
I do. Sorry about that. I think maybe I had some problem on my end. I don't know what happened.
No, it wasn't you.
Okay. 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 So I want to say first off, just to acknowledge Patrick's question, we have 23 tribes in New Mexico, and we have 19 pueblos, and just want to acknowledge the ancestral lands that he talked about. We are primarily, I think, as most of, and I call the first generation INN nonprofits. I think this is still true for many of us. We're primarily funded by foundations. A lot of us are building major donor programs and then membership programs, but we're primarily funded by major foundations. So throughout the course of our 9 years, we have been very fortunate in that the funders that have funded us have been very hands-off. They know what journalism is about. One of them is a traditional journalism funder. 3 of the other funders are not, but they're hands-off. And we had that conversation before, which is journalism is this, and our values and what you care about. That's the other thing. We think about what our values are as a nonprofit. It's kind of like what communities, uncovered communities, undercovered communities, children. One of our funders cares a great deal about children. That seems to, right there intersect with a lot of great journalism. So we think about our values. And so we've been very fortunate in that we have not had a problem with funders trying to dictate or even influence our reporting. Now, I want to say this: we're building our major donor program, which I think probably every time we get some money, we tell people you don't have any control over the editorial independence. We are independent of your money and you. That is something that people have understood. But as we build the major donor program, do I think that we might have to have more intense conversations with some people? Sure. I think that this is a difficult one. I also want to say, though, that as many of us who probably have worked in newspapers, there were stories that we did where advertisers pulled money. I've had that case happen to me more than once. So in newspapers, so it's always a balance. It's about how you navigate that balance of actually keeping very powerful institutions and people to account at the same time that often some of those same institutions and people might be, or they come from the same universe of wealth equals power. That's what I've understood from covering 30 years of politics. Money has a way of finding power, and vice versa. So yeah.
And Charlotte, I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that one as well.
Oh, well, I just wanted to mention that as a community paper, we're embedded in the community. I know our advertisers are business owners. I've lived here in this community for a long time. And so before we were a nonprofit, it was a little tricky to, navigate those conflicts, of interest where, that might influence editorial content or news stories or coverage. So I don't think not becoming a nonprofit is all that different. Although we're talking about larger sums of money, and as long as you're really clear up front and you have clear policies, about that separation between, funding does not determine editorial content, then that's very useful. I think we could be more transparent about who is funding our issues and our stories. And so that's something that I'd like to do more in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, the fundraising model, that we've experienced with the Utah Investigative Journalism Project has been interesting and maybe a little bit different because we have such an investigative focus. We've repeatedly had this really kind of awkward situation where people want to pay us to write on something, and it's always just kind of a super awkward and super tempting, of course, but we've always just, we maintained our editorial independence. We're also a member of and we're very transparent about who donates to us. Anyone can go to our website and see donations and things like that. And so that's always an interesting kind of ethical consideration. And, our nonprofit's been around for about 5 years, and so we're still kind of figuring it out as we go as well. But that's one area where we've said well, we've got to like put a line down here and say we always welcome your support, but we can't attach those specific strings to anything we do. And fundraising for us has also been a challenge because we've been very grassroots from the beginning. It took a while for us to kind of establish ourselves, and all of our donations have really been small level donations up until I'd say probably the last year or so. We started getting grant funding and things like that. And that presented its own challenges, but opportunities as well. I think building a strong grassroots kind of support was very useful for us. But it made life pretty difficult at the start. I think in the past 5 years I've been doing this nonprofit, I've done about every kind of gig work you could imagine. I've donated plasma. I've driven Uber. I remember once a late breaking thing had happened in a story that we were doing for the Salt Lake Tribune, and I had to like get rid of some Uber passengers real quick and then zip on home and make some edits. But it's worked out, because this is what we do, and I can't not do investigative journalism, so I'm happy to do it however I can. The issue of funding, and kind of how we engage with major donors and things like that also kind of brings up another consideration, I think, for nonprofit newsrooms, which is we understand that kind of the trade-off is that we're really here for the public's benefit. It's why we're not paying taxes with the nonprofits. Our work really belongs to the public. And so I think that kind of creates a different standard about how we engage with the audience. I'd be curious to know how people feel that's changed things in terms of like really interfacing with their community, representing their community, how they're taking, that aspect on of nonprofit journalism. Marcie, you want to go?
I have something. Sure. So part of why we wanted to launch Amplify Utah is because I came from many legacy newsrooms where I was meant to be that change agent, where I was the digital lead in legacy broadcast newsrooms, television newsrooms, and just found that turning the freight train around of the legacy institution is really, really challenging when you have all of these other needs and expectations that you need to be meeting to serve your current existing model. And so coming in and starting something new from scratch where we didn't have to subscribe to any prior business model was kind of the impotence of this project, and working with legacy news media to be able to tap into that power and that strength and that credibility within our organizations was key. But understanding that a big part of doing this is going to be starting from a blank slate. And so that was part of our goal. I mean, I have just found that turning that freight train around is really, really challenging for the work that born. Yeah.
Build on that. Trains and planes, you name it, right? They're all moving with momentum in a certain direction. And I would say, as I submit, this perspective, I submit it as a leader at the Tribune, but I've worked at many other legacy news organizations, and it's not a development that is unique to the Tribune, right? For a very long time, we had the monopoly. People had to read us, right? And we knew best, and we were right, and there was no debate, right? And then the internet presented itself and all kinds of competition, and we know what happened, right? We lost 16,000 jobs in journalism just last year across the country. In Utah, we've gone, by my count, from some 400 journalists a decade ago to fewer than 200 now, right, across the state, right? So it's happening here, it's happening everywhere. And as we got smaller, we got defensive, right? We heard from people who said, why can't you do that? And don't you know you're supposed to cover this? And where are you? You didn't show up to my fill in the blank, right? And we're supposed to be right. We're not supposed to get it wrong, right? And so we kind of put up the shield, in my view, right? And we said, you know what, we've got to bunker down. We've got to do what we can to survive. And we must transition as a nonprofit to better understanding what both our readers and those who don't even know we exist want, right? How can we make their lives better, right? How do we begin to write for people instead of writing about people? And there's a big difference philosophically in how we frame our stories if we're writing for people than if we are writing about them. So culturally, how do we affect that change in our organizations? At the Tribune, we've started that work. It's a process, right? And it's not as if you can just flip the switch. We've got to understand what it means, and then begin to take the steps to listen more authentically on the front end, such that what we give people is more relevant on the back end, or at the end of the process, if you will. But Marcie's right. I mean, that's a large barge, right? We'll bring boats into, and to turn that boat around, like, it's going to take some time, but that's okay. It's fun. It's good. It's the exciting stuff that we get to do as we look at how we can provide a meaningful experience for people as a nonprofit.
Can I add something that we're struggling with in New Mexico? New Mexico, those of us in the West, I'm originally from Georgia and the East, and people just don't have a sense of how large these states are. You can fit all of New York and all of New England into New Mexico. We have 2 million people. And in addition to that, it is, I want to talk about the digital landscape. We are digital, but we are ever mindful in our state that we have one of the largest digital divides in the country, in New Mexico, which is many people, indigenous communities, rural communities, they don't have the same, I guess, accessibility that we do in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, Farmington. And so, before COVID, we were actually going to start traveling around the state trying to meet with folks. We were thinking about that for years, but really getting into that, COVID hit. And the thing that I just want to just say about nonprofit journalism is we can, because I grew up in the same newsrooms that a lot of you did, we can listen to other communities now and remember that sometimes elders in the Navajo Nation, read the newspaper, the actual paper, or in the Hispanic New Mexico North, they may listen to radio, or, or they use phones. So it's going to be all of the above in the 21st century. We've got to figure out how to communicate with folks, not only in different languages, but in ways of different platforms and mediums. And, if you're listening to an elder speak, a journalist, I'm a journalist, my family always reminds me of this. I like to interrupt and ask questions. Nope, you listen. You listen. It's culturally, so how do you, we're in an extraordinary time right now. It is really exciting and terrifying at the same time. I just wanted to talk about the difference between digital and how other people maybe consume news in our state.
Let's see, Erica, did you want to take that one up too? No, is that a no?
No, I'm sorry, getting back to which question specifically?
Right.
We were talking about, well, you know, how you engage with your audience more now that it's a nonprofit. What's different about that? I mean, it's a community service. So what extra steps do you take? Extra, there's also all the planes and barges and trains, if that jogs your memory too.
Yeah, I think it's actually difficult. Just from my own experience and what I've observed. For example, I spent several years just really diving deep into the Institute for Nonprofit News and looking at all of the organizations and all of the work that they do. And I found that some incredible work is getting done all over the country. I found, really great organizations that I subscribe to now, and like the Belt in the Midwest, taking on what they call it Rust Belt issues. But I think a larger concern is that with this great work getting done, how do you get out there? How do you get this good work out there and develop your audiences? I think there are some successful models for that. I think the Narwhal in Canada is doing very well with that, and they cover issues across Canada. But I just don't feel like it has the same kind of, we have the same kind of relevance and as the legacy, we kind of expect this sort of package with the legacy type of reporting, news reporting in the newspapers. And I'm kind of looking for a convergence of those to see how we can get this good work out there and work with each other. And I think that's why I sought to continue my newspaper as well as start the nonprofit model, so that one, we can publish in our newspaper and get it out to our community. But also I want to work with other media outlets that are interested, and many of them won't be, but for those that are interested in co-publishing or republishing work that we're able to produce.
Very cool. What about Charlotte? Let's see, you didn't talk to this one.
I haven't talked about this yet. Yeah, community engagement is what we're all about, really. We have a community newsroom. So anybody who lives or works or feels some kind of connection to this geographical area, the west side of Salt Lake City, is invited to attend our public newsroom meetings. And they, we really think that it's best to talk to the people to find out what is newsworthy, we ask them what is newsworthy, what do you care about, what are the issues that are important to you. And since the impetus for the Westview was really to get more residents engaged in local politics, in their community and neighborhood councils. Too often we saw the same people coming to neighborhood council meetings, mostly white residents who did not reflect the makeup of our community, the demographic makeup. And so we really try to address the inequities that we see in our community and kind of shift the structure, the power structure, so that it better reflects the demographics of our community. So that's, we have quarterly issues that go out to everybody in the mail, and we have done stories in multiple languages, mainly Spanish, because our Latino population is a very high, in some cases it's been a majority minority population here. So the first way that we engaged with our community is to help them feel a valued part of our community and to be noticed and recognized and included. This inclusion is very important. And then, of course, our stories serve our community by informing them, engaging them. And then we have, you know, talking about voting, talking about different, sorry, my husband just walked in. So about voting, about boards, you know, how they can have a seat at the table at local government, you know, whether it's on the planning commission or the police civilian review board. And then also about social justice issues. And so we really focus on that and ask our readers and our community members what they would like to see in the paper, and provide a medium to have their voices heard. So sometimes they will write stories, and if it's opinion, we label it as opinion. If it's a narrative, we label it as a narrative, so that that's not confused between news, you know. But inclusion is very important.
If I could, I just wanted to chime in real quickly on something that Erica said about how opening up stories to be shared and kind of actually getting readers to read or viewers to consume what you're putting out there. I've had conversations with Lauren and with Charlotte about this, but I think part of what we need to be doing as new nonprofits, and if we're talking about being innovative, is we need to get rid of the old way of doing things. Is our goal as news organizations to get the scoop, to get it first, to own the story, or is the information more important? The information and the resources we're giving our readers, what's going to be more important? And the mindset of news is like, get the scoop, own the story, get the details no one else has. And so I think that's a shift of how we've done things our entire professional careers, how news organizations have run. And we have to, you know, start sharing. Sharing is caring if we really care about making sure that people get the information they need to make relevant, meaningful decisions, to build healthier communities, you know, for the greater good of knowledge.
Okay, just wanted to throw in something real quick there. We only just got a few minutes left there for our session. The Nationals letting us go just a little bit over because of the hiccup there. Yeah, with my organization, it's a little bit different, like looking for investigative projects, because I've often thought, well, I'm looking for the story nobody knows about, so how are they going to tell me about it? But kind of takes a while to realize that's kind of a misguided way of looking at things. And one thing we've tried to do was have kind of regular like coffee shop meetups. People could come up and just talk about things they think should be investigated, story ideas, and hoping to resurrect those real soon. I actually had a woman came to one of those meetings, and you know, her story was featured in this series that we've been doing about evictions in Utah. So we just got a couple of minutes left. I was wondering if one person could address something that kind of come up in the chat about translation services. Has anyone tried that for like your product? You know, I'd like to think that would be something that'd be getting easier nowadays, and it certainly would help the communities we serve. I don't know if any one person could address that real quick.
You know, we just ended a year-long project with ProPublica. We were one of their local partners, and so you know, we looked early on in ours back in 2012-13 about translation services. At the time, we didn't know if we could afford them. The only time that we have translated stories, ProPublica did it for us in the last large series of stories we did on premature deaths at a particular hospital in Albuquerque. And, you know, when another outlet wanted to reprint in Spanish a story from the border that we did, we had our reporter who speaks Spanish and reads Spanish look over their translation to make sure it looked okay. But this is important stuff. I mean, this is really important stuff, that question. And also about diversity of the newsroom is very important too.
Yeah. And just as a warning, so we're still using the same SPJ Zoom, so we may get bumped off real soon here. I think we'll let's if you have time, if we get bumped off, I apologize about that. Thanks everyone for having such a great event. But if we could, real quick, like 30 seconds, how do you guys see nonprofit newsrooms fitting into the future of journalism? Just the soundbite. Anyone want to go first?
I
I'll just say-
go.
Okay. Erica.
I think the trajectory is already there. We've already seen that nonprofit newsrooms are increasing. They're doing incredible work, and I think it's going to have a strong future.
Yeah. Charlotte, you were jumping in there.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think it's going to revolutionize journalism, thinking in different ways and thinking outside the box. So just like Marcie said, doing things in a different way. It's time we do that.
I think, if I may, I think that's right. The question for us is, do we keep going our own route, or do we actually consolidate, like in Colorado, where they have a bunch of people working in the same thing? Sounds like you guys are doing that with the community college. I think hubs are really important, and they're really moving across the nation as a model. So it's going to be interesting next decade.
Marcie?
Yes, I agree. I mean, what I said earlier kind of answers this question, but I think that we just need to shift the way that we look at the way that we do news and not be beholden to legacy ways of doing it. And then I think having conversations like this, I mean, this is the first time I've met both Erica and Tripp, and I think tapping into what we've collectively learned and start figuring out how to apply threads of what works with all of these many nonprofits who are doing all of these cool things across the country. Figuring out kind of best practices is, I think, what will help it, so we're not kind of little flashes in the pans all across the country. And I think that the more conversations we have like this, the